time.
There we
That's
go.
funny.
Well, you helped me remember to turn it on, so thank you. Alright, so Henry's law is about dissolvability, how well a gas dissolves, right? How does pressure affect how well a gas dissolves? Think of a hyperbaric chamber. If you've got high pressure,
Does that make the gas dissolve faster?
it does. It forces more gas into the blood. It allows more gas to dissolve. So that's why the hyperbaric chamber works. It's because if you put someone in this chamber with way more oxygen than's in the outside air, and you pressurize it, all of a sudden the oxygen has no other place to go except inside their body. That's why. Alright, what's the other law? Dalton's law. What is Dalton's law? Partial pressures. Yep. Dalton's law is about partial pressures, and these are good to keep on the top of your head, because if he asks a question where you have to remember the concept, probably the only one where he'll ask you to define it would probably be Boyle's law, because it's easy to remember the definition for that one. That's just a guess. But then he will most likely, you'll most likely have to remember the concepts between these two, and it's good to keep them straight. So Dalton's law is the partial pressures of the gases. And what are the pressures of the gases we care about? What's the percentages of the gases that make up the air that we breathe?
21%.
Oxygen's 21%.
Nitrogen 79.
Nitrogen 79.
Carbon is 0.04.
Yep.
And 4% is other.
Yeah. Other stuff. 79%, and then CO2 0.04%. There we go. Also good numbers to remember. We're just doing a little review of the respiratory system as a whole. Using
Yeah, I was
this
just
packet.
trying to write down everything.
Yeah. Alright, let's see. So, let's see. Oh, okay. So what was he talking about when he was like, when he was talking about like the carbaminohemoglobin and the oxyhemoglobin? What was that referring to? What was he talking about? Like, why does hemoglobin's name change?
It's like the loading of oxygen.
Yeah. So it's talking about, it's depending on what it's carrying. So hemoglobin is just the protein itself, right? Hemoglobin is the protein plus the heme plus the iron. And that's just by itself, it's like that. So, but then as soon as it starts, doing its thing and fulfilling its purpose in life, its name starts to change based on what it's carrying. So if it has oxygen in it, if it has oxygen attached to it, what's it called? Oxyhemoglobin. And then if it does not, when the oxygen leaves, what is it called? Deoxyhemoglobin. So it doesn't have any oxygen
That's
anymore.
when the oxygen is released in the tissues, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So when it picks up oxygen in the lungs, in the capillaries lungs, it's oxyhemoglobin. Travels through the body, and then once it gets to the tissues, it releases the oxygen. Now it's called deoxyhemoglobin. So then when it picks up a carbon dioxide, what is it called? This is the long one.
I know I wrote that down.
I'm just gonna write it over here. Actually, I'm gonna change my colors. it has carbon in the name.
Mm-hmm.
So first we've got oxy hemoglobin, and then we have carb, let me make sure I'm spelling this right. Carb amino hemoglobin. So oxyhemoglobin and carbaminohemoglobin, which is a fun word to say. I like saying it. So obviously hemoglobin can carry some carbon dioxide, but does it carry all the carbon dioxide?
Doesn't it usually dissolve as gas?
Does. Well, some of it dissolves in a gas, actually, very little of it actually. So only about 30% is transported as carbaminohemoglobin.
That is just,
What?
if that's a long word.
I know. It's fun to say though, just like rolls off the tongue. Okay, so only about 30% is carbaminohemoglobin. And then 7 to 10% is dissolved in the blood. So where's the other, how's the other like 60 to 70% transported? It's in the plasma, but it's not dissolved. It doesn't stay as carbon dioxide. When you put carbon dioxide in water, what is it converted to, the buffer that we've been talking about? Bicarbonate. So 60 to 70% is bicarbonate. And that's where that like diagram that he showed comes in. Did that confuse anyone? The diagram with the tissues and the red blood cells? Okay, so it's actually a surprisingly easy diagram, and you don't have to memorize you don't have to be able to label it or anything. It's just the concept. So I'm gonna draw my tissue in yellow, my red blood cell. But he might use something in here. So we'll go over it. And they draw red blood cells as from the side, but I don't like that. Because I'm like, is it a red blood cell? So that's the tissues, and then this is capillary wall. So these are spaces between, right? This is inside the blood vessel, this is outside. Okay. So first of all, what are our tissues producing? When you go through respiration, what's the byproduct of making ATP? The stuff we need to get rid of. CO2. So our tissues are making CO2.
Would you say that line wasn't literal? I'm sorry.
This is the capillary wall.
Okay. Sorry, I'm labeling what I'm drawing.
Oh, you're good. I'll make it. I want to make a different color. So that's the capillary wall, and this is the space, like the interstitial spaces.
Right. And that's a blood cell.
Yes, this is a blood cell. So this is inside the vessel.
Alright, gotcha.
Cool.
We're good.
Alrighty. So our CO2 is produced, and we've got oxygen just hanging out here on hemoglobin, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to draw two drawings. All right, we're just going to follow the carbon dioxide for right now. So we're not going to put oxygen on this diagram because oxygen just goes by itself into the tissues. It does nothing extremely like amazing happens with it. It just does its thing. Alright, so CO2 comes in, and CO2 is really high over here, and there's no CO2 in the freshly oxygenated blood, right? So CO2 is like, I'm gonna come over here. So CO2 comes over here, and it mixes with a bunch of stuff to produce bicarbonate. When it mixes with water, it produces bicarbonate. And you'll notice there's a couple other steps. You don't have to memorize like first it turns into H2CO3. You don't have to worry about that. But it does do so in the presence of the enzyme that allows that to happen is called carbonic anhydrase, and he might ask about that. So I would just know that. And so carbonic means it works on carbon, right? Carbon. And then anhydrase, ACE is the enzyme. And you can think of the hydrate, you can think of like hydration, it's added to water. So it's adding water to the CO2 to produce carbon bicarbonate. So carbonic anhydrase produces bicarbonate, and that bicarbonate then goes where? Does it stay in the red blood cell? Where does it go? The plasma, yep. Goes in the plasma, and it hangs out as our buffer. It hangs out as our buffer, which is pretty cool. And then, let's see, and then it makes a little H plus ion, which, what does H plus, what does that do to the pH of the blood? More acidic, yeah. So carbon dioxide, when it's broken down, makes the blood more acidic, right? So that's pretty cool. And then what's the thing, what did he mention, the shift? What was it was something, the something shift, and he said it was really important. Chloride shift, exactly. So why do we have a chloride shift? And what does that mean? What's happening? Exactly.
Is it because of the hydrogen, the plus hydrogen?
It's not so much because of the plus hydration, it's because you got rid of this bicarbonate, this buffer. So I called it a buffer, but it's still bicarbonate, so I'm gonna write bicarbonate. So you kicked out this bicarbonate, right? And now you want them to be, you want to keep the balances of the negative and positive, you know, relative the same. You want to keep it the same proportions.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to add something in. So your chloride shift, you have negative chloride, it comes in and hangs out inside. Because you don't want to lose negatives from inside the cell, because insides of cells are supposed to be more negative, right? So if you start getting rid of a bunch of negatives, your little red blood cell's in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So this chloride shift is super important to keep these cells at their resting membrane potential. So he specifically mentioned, like, you know, that it was really important, so I would definitely remember the concept of the chloride shift, and it's literally just when bicarbonate goes out, chloride goes in. And then when you get to the lungs, then because there's less carbon dioxide in the alveoli, right, than there is in this newly carbonated blood, right? This blood has a bunch of carbon dioxide in it. It's not carbonated. It's not the right word. Blood is not soda. So then this bicarbonate, once it gets to the alveoli in the lungs, the capillaries, it kind of, you know, for lack of a better word, senses that there's less carbon dioxide in the alveoli. So this bicarbonate actually goes back through the reverse process. And it goes goes back and it breaks apart from water, and it turns back into CO2, and then it goes out into the lungs. And then where's the chloride shift going to go? The other way, because you added the bicarbonate back to the lungs, right? So you want to take the chloride out, or back to the red blood cell. So when you're studying, so I would definitely study this little diagram, but when you're studying it, don't get like overwhelmed by the arrows and stuff, because it can, it can be kind of easy to get overwhelmed by it. But basically, just remember that everything is still going with its concentration gradients. Everything's still going from high to low. It's just now you're, focusing on the steps it takes. But definitely use the PowerPoint to like narrow it down. Because don't memorize this diagram so that like you can label it, because that's excessive and you don't need to. Just understand what it's talking about. Did that make a little sense, or did I confuse you?
Actually, that made a lot better.
Does that make a lot of sense? Okay, that's good. Is anyone still a little hazy on this? No?
Better than the diagram.
Huh?
I liked it better than the diagram.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's a lot better than the diagram.
Yeah, I mean the diagram has,
Extras.
it has stuff that you need.
Extras.
Like it has extra stuff, yeah. But I kind of wanted to point out the highlights, the bicarbonate, the carbonic anhydrase, and then the H plus is it is useful because it helps kick the kick the oxygen out and bring it back in. Which actually I'll bring that up because I forgot about those charts. So those little diagrams, like the acidity and oxygen affinity for hemoglobin. So, like this one. Was that confusing? Where he was talking about how acidity affects how oxygen binds and how much oxygen you have. Alright, let's see. So basically, if you have more acid, oxygen is going to be kicked out. So the higher the acidity goes in the blood, the less oxygen your red blood cells hold on to, and that's because of this hydrogen ion, because it starts kicking out the red blood cell. It starts kicking the oxygen off of the hemoglobin, off of the oxyhemoglobin. So why is that a good thing? That when your acid levels, when it's more acidic, why is it a good thing? Because it is a good thing, and it's a really good thing.
Don't you have more carbon though?
You do have more carbon dioxide. So what's good about this is that when you get to the tissues and CO2 starts coming in, right?
Mm-hmm.
CO2 starts coming in, it helps get more oxygen to the tissues. So as carbon dioxide comes in and is converted to bicarbonate, it helps, kind of kickstart the oxygen. Because the oxygen will go, but it kind of helps kickstart it, and it also helps your body figure out, where you need more oxygen. So like if you're exercising, right? If you're exercising, you're going really hard, then you're going to be producing more CO2 than normal.
Mm-hmm.
So when these red blood cells get here, you're going to have like a flood of CO2, a ton of bicarbonate, and your red blood cell is going to release some of the oxygen that it holds onto just in case.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to release more of that because now the blood is acidic by the tissues.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also a good thing because then when you get to the alveoli in the lungs and this process reverses and your blood is less acidic, oxygen now wants to come in. So it kind of prevents your red blood cells from holding on to oxygen in your tissues, and it allows them to receive oxygen in the alveoli. Does that make sense? Yeah, so because otherwise, if you didn't have this affinity, if the O2 liked to stay, if the hemoglobin, because hemoglobin loves hang on to O2, like it's baby. It's not gonna let it go, right? Because obviously you don't want it to, just break off as you're traveling through the bloodstream. All of a sudden you have it's not efficient. So it's gonna hold on to it. So then, which is a good thing while you're traveling, through the parts of the body that you don't need a bunch of oxygen to. Then if you get to this muscle that's exercising a lot, all of a sudden you need extra. So this high or this low acidity is going to kick out extra oxygen, and it's actually going to prevent the hemoglobin from reattaching to oxygen. It's going to prevent it from grabbing it and taking it back. Because you don't want that. You want all the oxygen to detach, and you want all the people to move out of their mom's house, and you want them all to leave. You don't want them to come back. Exactly. You got a bunch of kids, you got like 4 million kids, you want them all to leave. You don't want any of them to come back because the world needs them. So you don't want them to come back, and then when you get up to the alveoli, and all of a sudden you're like, well crap, I don't have any kids. This is boring. So then, you go to adopt a bunch of kids, right? And you want the hemoglobin to be ready, because you have a bunch of little orphaned oxygens in the alveoli that need a home. And so now, as this bicarbonate leaves the blood, and it's less acidic, now the hemoglobin is ready to receive more oxygen. So it adopts all the little stray oxygens and then carries them back, and then by the time it gets to tissues, it's sick of them. And the acidity.
I like your analogy.
Yes. Yes, that was a complete on-the-spot analogy.
Well, I was also thinking like a bus.
Yeah, there you go. A bus is a little bit kinder.
I'm remembering the Magic School Bus when they were doing that, the blood and everything and the oxygen. So I remember that. And I'm just thinking, Magic School Bus.
Yeah, so it's like a little bus. But the main point is that you don't want oxygen to come back and come back and bind with hemoglobin. So that's what the carbon dioxide and the acidity level is really good for. So when you're looking at those charts, and you're looking at the blue line for high blood pH and the red line for low blood pH, really the concept behind here is that the more acid you have, the less O2 you're going to have in the blood. That's the concept. So it says right here on the side, as acidity increases, O2 affinity for hemoglobin decreases. That's your core concept right there. And that's called does anyone remember, it's called an effect, a something effect has a name. Does anyone remember what it's called? It's called the Bohr effect. I'm gonna find mine. Yeah.
Find the color you want.
I'm gonna find the eraser actually. But yes, finding the color I want is an eternal struggle.
Well, now that you have all the color.
I know. Now that I have all the color, I'm like, I want more. It's not enough. All right, I'm gonna write this down. So, as acidity goes up, O2 in HB is hemoglobin. It's the abbreviation. Goes down. So when acidity.
And what'd you call it? The Bohr effect?
The Bohr effect, yeah.
Is it B-O-A-R?
B-O-H-R.
H-R.
Yep. It's called the Bohr effect. Or you can say the more H pluses you have, H plus goes up, O2 in hemoglobin goes down. Or you can say, and this, I'm rewording it in 3 different ways because there's a couple possibilities the way he could reword it. Because remember, H plus is what we use to determine how much, how acidic the blood is, right? So, wow, that's backwards. pH is a lower number more acidic, or is a higher number more acidic?
Lower.
Lower. So as pH goes down, and this is where it's confusing when I wanted to write this out. As pH goes down, O2 in hemoglobin also goes down. So do you kind of see how those three things are the same thing?
Mm-hmm.
It's just different ways of wording it. Is anyone having issues with this, with the wording in here? No? Cool. So like I said, I wanted to write those out because if he were to ask you a question about this, there's a couple possible ways he could ask it, and all of these are equally right. But there's only this one is listed in his PowerPoint. And it can be kind of confusing because pH goes down, you think, oh, it's less acidity, but it's actually not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had to look at that for a second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I was like, you know what? I need to write this down. And then it's the exact opposite with, it's as pH goes down, O2 is released from hemoglobin. As pH goes up, hemoglobin grabs O2. And okay. Does anyone remember how temperature affects oxygen release? So think about it when you're exercising, right? And those muscles are moving. They're heating up. So what do you think so if the goal is to get more oxygen to the tissues, what do you think temperature does, higher temperatures do to hemoglobin?
Does it make more oxygen go to the tissues?
It does. So the higher the temperature in your blood, in that specific capillary, the more oxygen is going to be released, which is for the exact same purpose as the carbon dioxide and the acidity levels, right? So that, if you're just sitting there, you're not exercising, your hemoglobin is releasing oxygen at whatever rate it needs to. And then all of a sudden, if you start exercising and maybe you start moving your arm really fast and just your arm, right? Mm-hmm. Then as soon as red blood cells start getting to that arm, the muscles in there are gonna be hotter than normal. So the red blood cells in your arm are gonna say, oh goodness, we need more oxygen. Who knows what this girl's doing? Mm-hmm. We gotta help her out, right? So more oxygen gets released in my bicep than it does in this bicep because the temperature's higher here than it is in here. So that's pretty cool. And also, metabolic activity, if your metabolism is going faster, it's releasing more heat. So you need more oxygen to feed your metabolism. Which is also good if you have a fever. If you have a fever, you can feed your hungry blood or tissue cells, get them going. Let's see. What is carbon monoxide poisoning? How does carbon monoxide poison us?
That's when it doesn't get released, as fast as it should, right?
From when you say doesn't get
From your blood.
released.
Doesn't it just
Carbon. So we've been talking about carbon dioxide, but carbon monoxide is CO.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. Did I say dioxide?
I don't know.
Okay. But carbon monoxide, what were you saying?
Oh, I was just saying, doesn't it just get trapped in your blood? No.
It does. So carbon monoxide is so close to carbon dioxide that the hemoglobin can't really tell the difference. So carbon monoxide sticks to the hemoglobin, but it does not follow the same rules for the temperature and the pH that CO2 does. So carbon monoxide sticks onto the hemoglobin and it stays there.
So this is where we got into the discussion of the hyperbolic chamber.
Exactly. So you're put in this hyperbaric chamber. So, because my mom was a respiratory therapist, so she explained this all to me, and it's pretty cool because people if you she treated a family once, their muffler was damaged, and so they didn't realize it, but carbon monoxide was coming into their car as they're driving. So a whole family, was all of a sudden passed out on the road, and they took them to the hospital, and they had severe carbon monoxide poisoning because all the carbon monoxide that they were breathing in stuck to the hemoglobin and it stayed there. It has no natural release because we're not supposed to breathe it in. So they had to put them in a hyperbaric chamber so that they forced, because if you put them in a hyperbaric chamber and you put more oxygen in there, just a ton of oxygen, the oxygen will eventually kick out some of the carbon monoxide just by sheer force. By sheer numbers, it'll just like overwhelm and kick the carbon monoxide off of.
Sorry, I just
the
like that.
hemoglobin.
Get out.
Exactly, yeah. It's like, I mean, you can imagine being like, this is my spot.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah,
So a whole bunch of Sheldons went in there and
exactly. Exactly. So that's why, it's one of the functions of the hyperbaric chamber, and that's why it works for carbon monoxide poisoning, because it's not so much that you're being poisoned, like, I mean, it is toxic in the sense that it will kill you, but it's not like, it's not gonna like make your, like, we think of poison.
You just been sleeping, right?
Yeah, exactly. You fall asleep because you kind of suffocate from the inside out, which is lovely. What else do we use a hyperbaric chamber for?
What's the peaceful day?
That's why people do that for suicide.
Bacteria. Yes. What kind of bacteria?
Peaceful.
There are a lot of
That are anaerobic.
Anaerobic bacteria. So why do we use a hyperbaric chamber if we have an anaerobic bacterial infection?
Because they don't tolerate oxygen, so
They don't tolerate oxygen, exactly. So what does anaerobic mean?
oxygen. 80, right?
Yes, without oxygen.
Yeah,
The A in front of it,
oxygenated.
an means without.
Yeah.
So it's bacteria that produce ATP without oxygen via anaerobic respiration. So if you put oxygen in there, they don't want that.
My grandparents are doing everything doing cartoons and it's like, it burns, it burns.
Exactly.
Infection can spread.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you want to you can kill all those bacteria if you just saturate the body completely with oxygen, which is, good and bad thing, because humans, it's good, like, you don't want to like breathe straight oxygen for a long time, because that will actually kill you if you just breathe straight oxygen, because your body's not designed to breathe straight oxygen. It's designed to have this mixture of gases in the right proportions. And if you remember the partial pressure in the diagram and stuff, you'll really mess your body up, and if you just breathe straight oxygen for a long time. So
It makes you fall asleep.
yeah, it's just
Sorry, it made me fall asleep. If you're on
Did it?
oxygen, I just instantly fall asleep because of it. So
really
yeah,
okay.
too much oxygen.
Yeah. Morphine's also funny to see people on morphine. That's funny.
You're talking about the tooth videos, right?
Oh no, I'm talking about my fiance on morphine.
Oh, okay.
He's like, whoa, this feels great. It was hilarious. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Completely different track.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I just found something. Histamine. What releases histamine? This is completely different from what we've been talking about. Basophils and not neutrophils.
One.
Eosinophils. Basophils and eosinophils. I'm gonna erase this. Y'all are done with this.
That was a review.
Huh?
That was a review, so.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm pulling all this out of this handout and the PowerPoint, so you can all see it. There are no secrets. Yeah, so histamine is produced by basophils. Is it histone or histamine? Histamine. And what does it do? It is actually, yes, it is a vasodilator. I don't know why I was thinking it wasn't. Yes, it's a vasodilator. No, it's not. I lied. I was reading this right. It's not a vasodilator. Vasoconstrictor, yes. Because have you ever heard of like an antihistamine for an
Yeah.
allergic reaction?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
part of
like
the
Benadryl and
reason,
stuff like that.
huh?
Benadryl.
Exactly. So part of it is because this allergic reaction, if you're breathing something in that you're allergic to, your body's first line of defense, your body's first reaction is going to say, stop breathing it in.
Oh, you itch.
And so, yeah. So if you don't get the signal right away, if your conscious brain doesn't, and you continue to sit out there in the pollen field, just having a good old time, your lungs are gonna be like, all right, we gotta save this person from their own stupidity, and the airways are gonna start to constrict so that you let less pollen in, right? So your basophils release histamine, and your eosinophils, mostly basophils, they release histamine and they constrict. Vasoconstrict. So asthma then is brought on by histamine, right? Part of it. It's bronchoconstriction though. Your bronchioles and your bronchi are constricting. So that's why you get the inhaler to, open it up, exactly, to relax those smooth muscles so that you can actually breathe, which is great. What does epinephrine do to your bronchial diameter? So remember, epinephrine is part of the fight or flight. So if you
so
are...
it opens it up so that you can...
Exactly. It opens it up so that when you're fleeing from air, you don't choke and die. You take in as much air as possible, because if it constricted, you'd see a bear and you would just die.
So you're just screwed if you were to see a bear and then run through a flower field.
Yeah, if you were allergic to pollen, you might have some issues, but your epinephrine probably would override that, and your fight or flight. I mean, if you're like severely allergic, you might pass out when you get to safety, but at least you lived. Let's see. Oh, what is, so in the little alveoli, right, we've got the surface tension from the water. What is in there that breaks up the surface tension? What's it called? Starts with an S. Surfactant. Surfactant. What is surfactant?
Lipoprotein.
It's a lipoprotein, exactly. Which means that it has one water-loving end and one water-hating end, right?
You said that it's like soap, right?
It is, exactly. Soap is a surfactant. So that's how soap cleans your dishes, because soap has one end. It's like the phospholipids that make up your cell membrane. Remember, you've got the little hydrophilic end that always points towards the interstitial fluid, and then the water-hating end, the little tails that point to each other. And they make a little barrier, right? So soap and surfactants act the same way. So when you put soap, on a greasy pan, water alone won't wash the grease off. But if you put soap on it, the little fat-loving end on it grabs up all of the oils.
This is your needle experiment, right?
It is, yeah.
What you're talking about?
Yeah, I should have. I don't know why I should have brought that. I should have done that. Because you can actually take a needle and you can balance the needle on the surface tension of the water, and it will stay there. Because the surface tension is so much, the H2O molecules love each other so much. And then you put soap in there, and you break up that surface tension. You get all those little water-loving ends. Exactly, yeah. And the needle just plummets to the bottom. It's pretty cool. Yeah. So when you're washing dishes, the little fat-loving end collects all the fat, and then when you put water on it, the water-loving end grabs the water, and it just takes it along for the ride. So the surfactant in the lungs helps to break up the surface tension so that your alveoli don't collapse, because they're so tiny that surface tension that seems so small to us is huge, and it will collapse them, and it will make the walls stick together, and you won't be able to breathe. So that's why premature babies have to be put in oxygen chambers. That's part of the reasons, because they don't produce enough surfactant, so their little alveoli stick together because they're not ready to be used. So you just have to give them a ton of oxygen so that the alveoli that are okay, that do have surfactant being produced, can take in as much oxygen as they need. And then, once they start to grow, the other alveoli start producing surfactant, and eventually they're fine. But this reduces surface tension. And it does that basically by getting in between the water molecules. Because it's like adding a little barrier so that they almost can't see each other. So some of the water molecules are blocked by this fat-loving end, this water-hating end, and they're repelled from it. They don't have like the network that they do. It's like having a bunch of holes in a net. It's not as strong. So reduces surface tension. I just like surfactant for some reason. I don't know why. There's certain like chemistry things that I learned about like in Chem 2 at the same time I was learning about it in Anatomy 2. So there's certain things that I'm just like, this is so cool, and most people don't care. What does compliance mean when you're talking about the lungs?
When you talking about what?
When you're talking about the lungs, what does compliance mean? What does it sound like it means?
I know what the word means. Does it mean like everything working together?
Kind of. It means how easily your lungs do what they're supposed to do. How easily they stretch. How easily. This says. Let's see. What does this say? Ease of lung expansion or distensibility for efficient ventilation. So basically, how well they stretch, how well the alveoli do their thing, how well the surfactant is working, because that helps too, because that has to do with how far your alveoli expand and how far they contract, or how far they collapse back into themselves. So compliance basically means, are your lungs working really well? Then they're compliant. And if they're not compliant, then they're not working really well. Alright, let's see. Alright, we've got like 8 minutes. Is there anything anyone thought of as we were going over that? Any questions about? No? You guys are doing good.
That practice test you gave us before the exam was I thought it was really helpful for the test.
Cool. Yeah, it was a really good practice test. In fact, there were 2 of them. Yeah, Dr. Saviat gave me that one because his old SI made that one for him.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions on the exam that were kind of relevant to the practice test. It was nice.
Yeah. Let's see what else we got in here. Oh, okay. So, I mentioned this on Wednesday, but when you're looking at the PowerPoints and it talks about external and internal respiration, what is that talking about? And that has to do with like when he shows the partial pressure diagram and talks about. I'm sorry?
I didn't hear you.
Oh, when you look on the PowerPoint, you see there's like a slide labeled external respiration, and it talks about like the lungs and alveoli, and then internal respiration. What are those? What's the difference between those two? What's going on in there? Do you remember?
I remember.
Yeah. So external respiration. Were you gonna say something?
I wrote that external is between the alveoli and capillaries. Internal gas exchange in the tissues.
Exactly, yeah. So that's literally all it means. External respiration is just talking about when the alveoli and the lungs and the capillaries in the lungs are exchanging gases. So external, like from the outside air, and then internal. Sorry,
Internal is when the gases actually exchange.
Yes, is when the gas exchanges in the tissues. So this is internal respiration right here.
Okay.
So don't get it confused with like anaerobic respiration or aerobic respiration. We're not talking about like producing ATP or anything. It's just talking about gas exchange. I feel like that's about it for the. I mean, there's some other. I didn't really get into like the parts of the brain, but those like the parts of the brain that control the breathing. I'm sorry.
I think we wrote those down.
Yeah, I would study those. I would study those and be familiar with the sites and stuff. It's real. There's not that much. There's just a couple of integration centers. I would know like the what the peripheral chemoreceptors are. Those are the different receptors in like the aortic arch. This is really, really succinct for the brain stuff. Just like looking over it, it's really succinct. I would use this to study. But don't kill yourself on the brain stuff, of course, because he probably will ask a couple questions because he likes the brain. But it probably won't be in depth because we're not talking about the brain, we're talking about the lungs. So just be familiar with that stuff. Yeah. And then lung volume and capacity, that's more for, that's more geared towards lab. But if he asks you, like, if he asks you about, like, he puts an equation up there, like what is ERV plus RV? It's functional residual capacity. So, but this is a nice little chart. And you need to know that anyways. All right. Y'all are wonderful. Oh look, what is this? Oh, that's cool. There's some stuff about acidosis in here.
Mm-hmm.
And kidneys and stuff. I didn't notice that. I'm very observant. Yeah. All right. Y'all are doing great. Any questions? No? You are free. Ugh. Free to eat lunch and drink coffee, which is my goal in life.